Makhachev vs. Charles Oliveira rematch in January for that Brazil card. It turns out that Oliveira actually was the first one to be offered to fight Islam and get his rematch before they went to Volkanovski. And it probably also spells out why that Brazil card doesn't look necessarily too strong right now, because the plan seemed to have been to have Oliveira on the card. And according to Diego Lima, who is Charles Oliveira's coach, Oliveira turned it down. And the reason as to why is quote-unquote emotional stress. Not injuries, not anything like that, but he wasn't mentally prepared to get back in there with Islam Makhachev. And that was pretty shocking for me to hear. I can understand him fighting so often. As a champion, he fought 3 times in a span of a year, and each one of those fights were very difficult. He got dropped 4 times in that year, and I understand completely if he wants a vacation, he wants to take some time off, but I really wonder what that emotional stress was tied to. Was it tied to the Islam fight, that he's not ready mentally to fight Islam himself, or he's not ready mentally yet to get back in the cage against anybody? And I think it's the latter, because he also did kind of turn down that Rafael Fiziev fight and said that he needs a vacation. When you go and read what Diego Lima said, it can absolutely seem like Oliveira doesn't want to fight Islam, but it seems more that he just doesn't want to fight anybody right now. And the man deserves some rest. He deserves some time off to get his head into the right space and come back in full force. Charles Oliveira is the second most active lightweight champion in history, right behind Benson Henderson. And we have to give him respect for the fact that he didn't take time off as a champion like many other champions do. They barely fight. He decided to take time off after losing the belt, just so he doesn't hold up the division. That absolutely deserves respect, man. But at the same time, you miss opportunities. We don't know if he's ever going to get this chance ever again. And that is why Volkanovski is now fighting Islam Makhachev, where it seems like there really isn't a number 1 contender in that division. But I am very pleased to see that the UFC at least wanted the rematch with Charles Oliveira, knowing that what he did in such a short amount of time, and knowing how big of a draw he actually is for the organization. But with all this going on, let's say if Islam does beat Volkanovski, there is a path for Oliveira to get 1 or 2 more wins and then getting back in there with Islam Makhachev. But if Volkanovski somehow beats Islam, as unlikely as it is, that lightweight division might be in a bit of trouble, because then Volk is going to be defending between featherweight and lightweight. And I'm pretty sure he's not going to be able to defend each belt twice in a year. So he might be able to do a single lightweight title defense and a single featherweight title defense in 1 single year, making those divisions roll slowly. And not only that, there's other guys coming up there right now. Rafael Fiziev is amped to fight someone right now. He needs a matchup, and he's a couple wins away from a potential title shot. The next guy he fights has to be in the top 5. So there's even a possibility that he fights one more time and he gets a title shot, if Oliveira is going to have a long layoff, that is. And actually, with Oliveira confirming a bit of a layoff here, and Dustin Poirier coming out and say that he doesn't want to fight Beneil Dariush, we might just gotten our next matchup. We might get Rafael Fiziev versus Beneil Dariush for the number 1 contender spot. Gaethje's been out for some time. Nobody really knows what he's doing, what he's up to, and if he wants to fight soon. But it looks like now Fiziev versus Dariush needs to be the next fight lined up in order to determine who fights for the belt next. But I am going to be honest here, in terms of Oliveira's chances of becoming a champion again, I think they're rather low. For one, Islam is a very tough guy for him to beat. And number 2, there's other guys in the division that are rising up that are going to give Oliveira a very hard time in there, especially someone like Rafael Fiziev. And not only that, Oliveira's taking so much damage. I wouldn't be shocked if we start seeing him getting hurt even more in fights too, where he might even get knocked out in his fights. For all the wars that he put on, I mean, those are going to have some negative effects on him. And these knockdowns might start to turn into knockouts. But Oliveira deserves so much praise for what he did in his run. Not only the performances that he put on, the fun fights and all of that, but he is the only lightweight champion to fight 3 times in a year since Benson Henderson back in 2013. And that is another reason why people love Oliveira so much. Then we look at the other champions that barely fought. For an example, BJ Penn, even though he fought very often for the majority of his run, it did take him 14 months to defend his belt against Kenny Florian after beating Sean Shirk because he went up to welterweight. And as for Frankie Edgar, the majority of his fights had 4 months in between, besides the 2 Gray Maynard fights which had 9 months in between. But we look at Benson Henderson, who actually was the most active lightweight champion in history. Benson Henderson fought Frankie Edgar, Nate Diaz, and Gilbert Melendez in a single year. Anthony Pettis was a champion for a very long time, even though he barely fought. 15 months until he defended his belt for the first time, and then 5 months after that. It took RDA 9 months to defend his belt, and then 8 months after that. Eddie Alvarez seemed to be fighting pretty actively, but he was only a champion for 1 title defense, in which he lost to Conor McGregor, and we don't have to talk about Conor McGregor. Conor took an eternity to ever fight again. Khabib had 6 months until he defended his belt for the first time, and then 11 months after that, and then 13 months after that. And of course, there were some implications with the whole Tony thing, but a lot of people still point their fingers at Khabib for stalling that whole thing out. And then we of course have Charles Oliveira, who is the second most active lightweight champion in history, right behind Benson Henderson. Did not waste time to defend his belt. Hopefully Islam Makhachev follows suit, unlike Khabib, who defended his belt 3 times in 2 years. Hopefully he follows Oliveira's and Benson Henderson's path of getting in there a lot more often. But as you can see, Charles Oliveira, the second most active UFC lightweight champion in history, and the reason why I have to give him more credit than Benson Henderson is because his fights were wars. In Benson's fights, there weren't near the amount of damage that Charles Oliveira's fights had. And